Impossible. Julian Thorne's gaze froze, snagged on the figures huddled against the rain outside his car window. Her Eleanor Vance. 12 years buried, now drenched, desperate, flanked by 2 small, hungry-looking children. Recognition was a physical shock, a crack in the icy facade he'd perfected. Emotional deviation detected. His voice, when he finally spoke, was sharp, colder than the storm drive-on. But as the limousine slid away, leaving the ghost and her burdens behind, one question burned. What in God's name was Eleanor Vance doing there? And why did seeing her feel like the beginning of everything falling apart? The final signature was a mere flick of Julian's wrist, precise and devoid of flourish. Across the expansive obsidian desk, the other party, men who had entered the room radiating confidence, now wore the tight, pale masks of defeat. Julian watched them gather their expensive briefcases, his expression unreadable, revealing nothing of the calculated demolition he had just executed. Billions shifted futures, altered empires nudged closer to his orbit. It was just business. Predictable. Controllable. Unlike people. People were messy variables, prone to irrationality, to betrayal. He preferred the clean lines of data, the unwavering logic of the market. His office, perched high above the sprawling city, reflected this preference. It was a minimalist masterpiece of glass, steel, and muted tones, clinically clean, almost sterile. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating floating dust motes in the otherwise immaculate air, but offering no warmth. Julian seemed capable of absorbing. He stood the movement, fluid, economical. "See our guests out, Michael," he instructed his waiting assistant, his voice a low, even tone that allowed no argument. No thank you, no goodbye, just dismissal. The transaction was complete, the human element now irrelevant. Later cocooned in the silent luxury of his chauffeured sedan. Julian stared impassively at the city, blurring past. Rain had begun to fall, slicking the streets, blurring the neon lights into abstract watercolor streaks against the tinted windows. He rarely looked, truly looked, at the teeming life outside his insulated world. It was noise, chaos, inefficiency. A landscape of needs and struggles he had long since compartmentalized, filed away as not his concern. His world was one of structured deals, controlled environments, predictable outcomes, or so he strived to maintain. The car slowed, caught in the inevitable snarl of downtown traffic near a bustling intersection. His gaze drifted unfocused over the rain-lashed pavement, the hurried figures huddled under awnings. And then it snagged, stopped under the faded canvas awning of a closed bakery. Seeking meager shelter from the persistent drizzle, stood a woman thin, wearing a coat that looked inadequate for the damp chill. She clutched the hands of 2 small children huddled close beside her. Their faces were pale, their small bodies tense against the cold. There was a weariness in the woman's posture, a slump to her shoulders that spoke of battles fought and perhaps lost. Just another unfortunate tableau in the urban sprawl destined to be forgotten the moment the traffic moved. Except Julian's breath hitched almost imperceptibly. His jaw tightened by a fraction. He leaned forward, a movement so slight it was barely noticeable, his eyes narrowing, cutting through the rain-streaked glass, the angle of her head as she looked down at the smaller child. The way a stray strand of dark hair clung to her cheek, the curve of her jawline familiar, even through the exhaustion etched upon it. Recognition slammed into him like a physical blow, sharp and unwelcome. A ghost from a life he had meticulously buried, sealed away behind walls of ambition and calculated detachment. His mind trained for rapid analysis and Control scrambled to categorize the anomaly, to reduce the sudden jarring surge of something to manageable data points. Internal assessment. Subject identified, Eleanor Vance. Status unscheduled. Visual encounter, probability 99, 8%. Temporal displacement, approximately 12 years. Contextual deviation, significant accompanying units. 2 estimated age. Range 4 to 6 years. Physical condition appears suboptimal. Emotional impact index, unexpectedly high. Action required data suppression, re-establish baseline. He drew a sharp, controlled breath, forcing the analytical overlay to mask the tremor that threatened the surface. The carefully constructed composure settled back into place, a familiar shield. Eleanor Vance. A variable he thought long neutralized here. Now like this. Drive on his voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet hum of the engine. Colder than usual. The chauffeur, accustomed to his employer's clipped commands, didn't hesitate. The sleek car slid forward, merging back into the flow of traffic, leaving the small group under the awning. Behind, Julian stared straight ahead, his knuckles white. Where his hand rested on his knee, the city lights continued their indifferent dance outside the window. But the image remained burned onto the back of his eyelids. Eleanor, weathered but unmistakable, flanked by 2 small, hungry-looking children, huddled against a world that seemed utterly indifferent to their plight. The rain beat against the glass, mimicking the sudden unwelcome turbulence within the gilded cage of Julian's meticulously ordered existence. A crack had appeared in the flawless facade, and through it, the past was starting to seep in. Sleep offered Julian no escape. The image of Eleanor huddled under the awning with her children superimposed itself onto spreadsheets and market projections behind his closed eyelids. He woke before dawn, the pristine silence of his penthouse apartment feeling less like sanctuary and more like a vacuum. He moved through his morning routine with mechanical precision. The cold shower, the black coffee, the impeccably tailored suit, hoping the familiar rituals would restore the equilibrium she had shattered. It didn't work. At the office, his focus, usually laser-sharp, kept fracturing. He snapped at his assistant Michael over a minor scheduling query, his voice tighter than usual. He found himself staring out the window, not at the cityscape he commanded, but scanning the streets below. A Luddite urge he couldn't quite suppress. He dismissed it as irritation, an anomaly in his system that needed purging. Perhaps revisiting the vicinity, confirming the transient nature of the encounter, would recalibrate his focus under the guise of inspecting a downtown property he rarely visited. He instructed his chauffeur. The property inspection was swift, perfunctory. Julian exited the building onto the bustling sidewalk, already mentally dismissing the errand as futile. His driver held the car door open, a black portal back to his controlled world. And then she was there, not huddled under an awning this time, but walking with determined steps, her children's small hands held tightly in hers. Eleanor Head held high, a flicker of defiance in her eyes, despite the undeniable signs of hardship clinging to her like the city grime. It was Julian who faltered a momentary hesitation before stepping fully onto the pavement, placing himself directly in her path. An unwanted collision, orchestrated perhaps by a force more potent than his own rigid will. Her eyes widened fractionally in surprise, then narrowed with a guardedness that was instantly familiar, a shield he remembered from long ago. The children stopped, with her small faces turned up towards him with open curiosity. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken history and the ambient noise of the city. Julian cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud. He defaulted to the formality he used as armor. Vance, he began his tone, stiff lacking its usual commanding resonance. An unexpected coincidence. He cursed himself internally. Coincidence. The word felt clumsy, inadequate. Eleanor offered no polite platitudes. Her gaze swept over him, taking in the expensive suit, the polished shoes, the air of untouchable wealth. A faint, humorless smile touched her lips. "Mr. Thorne," she replied, her voice low, but clear, using his surname like a carefully placed stone, reinforcing the distance between them. "Life is full of them, isn't it?" He felt a prickle of annoyance at her cool composure, at the way she refused to be intimidated. He wanted this interaction over the anomaly contained. "Back to the default solution, I observed your circumstances yesterday," he stated, avoiding her eyes, focusing somewhere over her shoulder. "Clearly things are challenging." He reached inside his jacket, his hand hovering near the smooth leather of his wallet. "Allow me to offer some assistance." The word felt sterile on his tongue. Eleanor didn't flinch. Instead, a spark ignited in her tired eyes, a flicker of the fire he vaguely recalled. She didn't look at his hand, but directly into his eyes, her stare unnervingly steady. "Assistance," she echoed the word, sharp-cutting. "Or is it absolution you're buying today?" Julian, using his first name, jolted him. It breached the formal distance he'd tried to establish, bringing the past rushing into the present. She took a small step closer, lowering her voice, though its intensity burned brighter. 12 years, Julian. 12 years of silence. And now you see me on a street corner and suddenly feel the urge to offer assistance. The sarcasm was a physical force. "Keep your money. We manage." Her words, sharp with pride and layered with years of unspoken hurt, struck him more effectively than any physical blow could have. He, Julian Thorne, accustomed to people fawning, pleading, yielding, was being dismissed, refused by her, by the woman whose memory he'd tried so hard to erase, now standing before him, embodying a strength his billions couldn't touch. One of the children, the smaller girl with wide, observant eyes, tugged at Eleanor's coat. "Mummy," she piped up, her voice thin but clear. "Is that the rich man with the shiny car from yesterday?" The innocent question hung in the air, brutally highlighting the chasm between their worlds. Eleanor gently squeezed her daughter's hand, her expression softening for a moment, before hardening again as she looked back at Julian. He stood there, momentarily speechless, the smooth lines of his usual responses failing him. His hand dropped from his jacket, empty. He felt wrong-footed, exposed in a way he hadn't been in years. The carefully constructed walls around him felt suddenly alarmingly thin. This wasn't a business negotiation. It was something raw, unpredictable. Human Eleanor held his gaze for another long moment, a complex mixture of defiance, weariness, and perhaps a flicker of old pain in her eyes. Then, without another word, she turned. Gathering her children close, she continued down the sidewalk, her back straight, leaving Julian standing alone amidst the city's indifferent flow. He watched her go, the image of her retreating figure. Proud, despite the threadbare coat, resilient, despite the obvious struggle, etching itself deeper into his mind than the sight of her sheltering from the rain. The easy solution, the financial transaction that resolved all difficulties in his world, had been utterly rejected. The collision had happened, and it had left Julian Thorne completely inexplicably adrift. Julian Thorne did not tolerate loose ends. He did not abide by unresolved variables. Eleanor Vance, standing defiant on a rain-slicked sidewalk, was both her image, the sharp clarity of her pride, mixed with the undeniable evidence of her struggle, lingered like a persistent glitch in his meticulously coded world. It disrupted his focus, frayed the edges of his composure. He found himself pacing the length of his office, a restless energy thrumming beneath his skin. That multi-million-dollar deals no longer soothed. The disruption required analysis, understanding control. He summoned Michael, his ever-efficient, unflappable assistant. Michael appeared instantly, notebook poised, face professionally blank. Michael Julian began turning to face the vast window, his back to his assistant. It felt easier than meeting his gaze. "I require information." Discreetly. Of course, Mr. Thorne, subject Michael's pen, hovered. Eleanor Vance, V-A-N-C-E. He spelled it out, the name, feeling foreign yet intimately familiar on his tongue. Current residence, employment status, financial situation. Any dependents, compile a comprehensive background. Priority Alpha. Michael's pen scratched across the page. There was no flicker of surprise, no questioning, eyebrow raise, merely quiet competence. Yet Julian sensed a momentary pause, a micro-adjustment in the assistant's posture, before he replied, "Understood. Sir, comprehensive background. Eleanor Vance. Priority Alpha discretion, assured internal assessment." Michael might have thought deviation from standard corporate intelligence portfolio, 100% objective, personal unspecified, proceed with protocol. Julian waved a dismissive hand. "Report directly to me. No digital trails where unnecessary." "Naturally, sir." Michael withdrew as silently as he had entered. Left alone again, Julian returned to his desk, attempting to immerse himself in the abstract beauty of financial projections. But the numbers swam. His mind kept replaying the encounter. Eleanor's unflinching gaze, the way she'd said his name, the small girl's innocent question. He had built an empire on anticipating risks, on neutralizing threats. What threat did Eleanor Vance pose? None, his logic insisted. She was a ghost, an echo. Yet, why did the echo feel so loud? Why did her refusal of his money sting more than a market downturn? Was it pity? Guilt? He recoiled from the terms. Emotions were liabilities, vulnerabilities he'd learned to excise long ago after. The report arrived less than 24 hours later, delivered by Michael in a sealed, plain manila envelope. No digital copy as instructed, Julian waited until Michael had left, before opening it, a strange reluctance coiling in his gut. The information was laid out with Michael's typical precision bullet points, factual data devoid of emotional language. Yet the picture they painted was stark, brutal. Residents' rented room in a dilapidated building, fringe neighborhood, notice of eviction, pending rent, 3 months overdue. Landlord, notoriously aggressive, employment, 2 part-time jobs. Cleaner at a downtown hotel night shift, waitress at a small diner early mornings. Income below subsistence level for adult, plus 2 dependents. Financials, significant debt accumulation, primary sources, residual medical bills, younger child, unspecified respiratory illness, now resolved, and liabilities left by former partner, abandonment confirmed. No current support payments received, multiple declined credit applications, targeted by predatory short-term lenders. One specific collector, a man named Silas Croft, noted for aggressive tactics. Dependents, 2 children, daughter Lily, aged 6, son, Thomas, aged 4. Both enrolled in local public school and daycare attendance. Regular despite circumstances, Julian read through the stark facts, a cold knot tightening in his chest. Medical bills, abandonment, predatory lenders, eviction. It wasn't just hardship. It was a relentless siege. He remembered Eleanor from years ago, vibrant, full of laughter, fiercely independent even then. How had she ended up here? He paused at the mention of the debt collector, Silas Croft, aggressive tactics, that could mean anything, none of it pleasant. And then Michael had included a small, almost parenthetical note, likely gleaned from a discreet source during the background check. It detailed an observation from a daycare worker. Eleanor often picks up extra cleaning shifts when available, sometimes arriving exhausted. Mentioned saving for a proper winter coat for Lily. Younger child Thomas reportedly asked another parent last week if Santa Claus accepted IOUs. A proper winter coat, IOUs for Santa Claus. The clinical detachment Julian had tried to maintain fractured completely. This wasn't data. It was desperation, met with quiet dignity, and a mother's fierce, weary love. He felt a sudden sharp memory surface. Himself, years ago, dismissing Eleanor's concerns about his own relentless ambition, telling her financial security was the only thing that mattered, the only reliable foundation. He had been so certain, so arrogant, so wrong. He leaned back, the expensive leather chair creaking faintly. His past certainty felt like ashes in his mouth. He thought he had fortified himself against the chaos of human emotion, against the vulnerability that came with connection. He had built his walls high after trusting someone had cost him dearly. Not just money, but a piece of himself. He'd vowed never to be exposed like that again. Yet here he was, profoundly unsettled by the plight of a woman he hadn't seen in over a decade. A woman whose current struggles seemed a cruel echo of the security he worshipped. He reread the section on Silas Croft aggressive tactics, pending eviction. The pieces clicked into place with grim certainty. Eleanor wasn't just struggling. She was on the precipice, and someone was ready to push her over. The lingering image of Eleanor wasn't just an echo anymore, it was a warning, and the uncomfortable feeling churning inside him wasn't just pity or guilt. It felt terrifyingly like responsibility, a variable he had never factored into his life's equation. The need for control warred with a rising, unfamiliar tide of something else, something deeply human and profoundly inconvenient. He didn't know what to do, and for Julian Thorne, not knowing was the most dangerous state of all. The knowledge of Eleanor's imminent eviction, coupled with the predatory presence of Silas Croft, settled like a low-grade fever in Julian's system. He couldn't shake it. He instructed Michael to monitor the situation, discreetly of course, feeding him updates like unwelcome doses of reality. The eviction date loomed less than 24 hours. Croft had reportedly increased his harassment, appearing near her building, making veiled threats. Julian paced his office, the city lights below, mocking his internal chaos. Logic dictated non-interference. Getting involved was messy. It invited complication exposure, the very things his meticulously constructed life was designed to repel. Hadn't he learned that lesson already, etched in the scar tissue of past betrayals? Helping Eleanor now tangibly would mean acknowledging a connection, a responsibility he had spent 12 years denying. It was illogical, risky, and yet. The image of a small boy asking if Santa accepted IOUs. The stark fact of medical debt incurred for a sick child. Eleanor's face defiant, even in hardship. These were illogical variables, too stubbornly refusing to fit into his risk assessment models. He found himself that evening telling his chauffeur to drive downtown towards her neighborhood. He didn't have a plan. He told himself it was merely information, gathering a final assessment before closing the file. But a deeper, unacknowledged current pulled him towards the precipice. He knew Eleanor was teetering on. He arrived to find the grim scene already unfolding. A battered moving truck idled at the curb outside the dilapidated apartment building. Piles of meager belongings, cardboard boxes, a worn armchair, plastic bags stuffed with clothes, sat forlornly on the damp sidewalk under the harsh glare of a street lamp. And there, standing amidst the debris of her life, was Eleanor. Facing her was a heavy-set man with a sneering face. Julian instantly recognized from the file description Silas Croft. He gestured aggressively towards the piled belongings, his voice a low, menacing growl that carried even to Julian's car across the street. Two children, Lily and Thomas, clung to Eleanor's legs, their small faces pale with fear. Eleanor stood her ground, though Julian could see the tremor in her hands. Her voice, though strained, was clear. "I told you I just need a few more days, Mr. Croft. I have work lined up. I can make a payment, days." Croft laughed a harsh, unpleasant sound. "Your days ran out last week. Sweetheart, time's up. Everything out, and you still owe me plenty." He took a step closer, invading her space. "Maybe we can discuss alternative payment arrangements." Julian watched his hands clenching into fists. He saw Eleanor flinch at the man's insinuation, saw her instinctively pull her children tighter behind her. He saw the raw fear in her eyes, warring with a fierce maternal protectiveness that made her stand taller, despite the obvious terror. He saw the children begin to cry silently. That was the breaking point. The cold calculation shattered, the years of detachment evaporated in a sudden white-hot surge of something that felt dangerously like rage. All the hostile takeover strategies, a fleeting, ironic thought flashed through his mind. The boardroom battles reduced to dealing with a common thug over a few $1,000s. The market is infinitely more civilized. Before the thought even finished, Julian was out of the car, crossing the street with quick, purposeful strides. His sudden appearance emerging from the shadows like an avenging spectre, clad in bespoke tailoring, startled everyone. Croft spun around, momentarily confused. "Who the hell are you?" Julian didn't stop until he was standing directly between Croft and Eleanor, positioning himself slightly in front of her and the children. He ignored Croft, his gaze fixed on the man with an intensity that could freeze markets. "Silas Croft," Julian stated, his voice dangerously quiet, yet carrying an unmistakable weight of command. Croft, initially aggressive, seemed to shrink slightly under Julian's focused stare, perhaps recognizing the implicit power radiating from him. "Yeah. What's it to you?" "Miss Vance's debt." Julian continued, his tone glacial. "As of this moment, consider it settled." In full, Croft blinked, then sneered, just like that. "You think you can just—" I don't think Julian cut him off, the words like chips of ice. "I know you will cease all contact with Miss Vance and her children immediately. You will forward the finalized statement of account detailing all principal and accrued interest, legitimate interest, to my legal department." He pulled a sleek card holder from his pocket, extracted a card, and held it out. Not to Croft, but towards Eleanor, though his eyes remained locked on the stunned debt collector. "My lawyers will handle the transfer. If you attempt to contact Miss Vance again, in any capacity, the consequences will be significant. Am I understood?" The air crackled with tension. Croft stared at the card, then back at Julian's unyielding face, clearly weighing his options. The name Julian Thorne might not mean anything to him personally, but the aura of absolute confidence. The mention of lawyers, the sheer unexpectedness of it all was clearly intimidating. He swallowed his bravado, deflating. Yeah, all right. Fine." He snatched the card almost reluctantly. "Lawyers got it." He threw one last resentful glare at Eleanor, then gestured angrily at the movers. "Pack it up, waste of time." He stormed off towards the truck without a backward glance. The movers quickly began reloading the truck, eager to leave the charged atmosphere. In the sudden ringing silence, Julian finally turned towards Eleanor. She stared back at him, her expression a maelstrom of shock, confusion, and something else, perhaps deep-seated wariness. Her arms were wrapped tightly around her children, who peeked out from behind her eyes, wide with bewilderment. The immediate threat was gone. The eviction was, for the moment, halted. Julian had acted decisively, impulsively, shattering his own rules. He had stepped out of the gilded cage and into the messy reality of Eleanor Vance's life. He had made his shocking choice. And now, standing on a broken sidewalk, under a flickering street lamp, surrounded by the remnants of her disrupted life, he had absolutely no idea what came next. The harsh growl of the departing moving truck faded, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the earlier confrontation. Streetlights cast long, distorted shadows over the scattered boxes, monuments to a life upended. Eleanor stood frozen, her arms still protectively wrapped around Lily and Thomas, who peered out with wide, confused eyes. She stared at Julian, not with gratitude, but with a bewildering mix of shock, suspicion, and a deep, simmering anger. Julian felt exposed under her gaze, the adrenaline from the confrontation rapidly draining away, leaving him feeling hollow and uncertain. He had acted, yes, but impulsively driven by something other than logic. Now facing the woman whose life he had just irrevocably interfered with, he had no script, no strategy. The silence stretched, amplifying the awkwardness, the weight of 12 years of unspoken history pressing down on them. Why, Eleanor finally whispered, her voice raspy, barely audible above the distant city hum. Why now, Julian? He opened his mouth, then closed it. The easy answers, it was nothing a simple transaction, felt like lies cheapening the raw emotion of the moment. The truth was far more complex, tangled in roots he hadn't dared examine for years. "This isn't the place," he said instead, his voice rough. He gestured vaguely towards the street, the lingering presence of Croft, the curious glances of passers-by. Let me help you get these things somewhere safe. Secure. Then we can talk." It wasn't a command, more of an awkward plea. Eleanor hesitated, distrust warring with exhaustion, and the undeniable relief of the immediate threat being gone. She looked down at her children, then back at Julian, her eyes searching his face for something, sincerity perhaps, or the familiar cold calculation. She expected safe, she questioned bitterly. Is anywhere truly safe when Julian Thorne decides to reappear in your life? Despite the sting, he held her gaze. "Please, Eleanor, for the children. Let me call someone. Arrange temporary accommodation. A hotel. Just for tonight. Somewhere warm. Then you can tell me to leave." The mention of the children seemed to sway her. She looked at Lily's shivering form, at Thomas's thumb, creeping towards his mouth, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years. She gave a single, weary nod. Within an hour, thanks to Julian's efficient and now thoroughly bewildered assistant, making discreet arrangements, they were in the sterile anonymity of a hotel suite. The children, exhausted and overwhelmed, were quickly settled with some food, ordered via room service, collapsing onto one of the large beds, drifting towards sleep. The door closed softly behind them, leaving Julian and Eleanor alone in the suite's living area, the luxurious surroundings, a stark contrast to the harsh reality they had just escaped. The silence returned, but now it felt different, expectant, charged. Eleanor sank onto the edge of a plush sofa, wrapping her arms around herself, as if cold though the room was warm. She didn't look at him. "All right, Julian," she said quietly, her voice flat. "You played the White Knight. You paid the dragon. Now tell me why. What game is this?" Julian remained standing, feeling out of place, an intruder in a scene he had orchestrated yet couldn't control. "It's not a game, Eleanor, isn't it?" She finally looked up, and the raw hurt in her eyes was like a physical blow. "Everything with you was always a game. A calculation. A means to an end. Your end, so what's the angle now? Appeasing some long-dormant conscience, a tax write-off. Or perhaps you needed a reminder of how far you've climbed by seeing how far I've fallen. No, it's not." He started the injustice of her accusation, cutting deep, yet horribly close to how he used to think. Then what? She interrupted, her voice rising, trembling with suppressed emotion. 12 years ago, you vanished. One day we were, us, planning, talking about futures. The next, you were gone. No explanation, no goodbye, just silence. Like I never existed, like we never mattered. Did you ever for 1 second think about what that did to me? He flinched. He had thought about it, late at night, in the empty silence of his success. He had let the memory surface, only to brutally suppress it. It was complicated. He managed the words. Inadequate. Complicated, she laughed, a short, harsh sound, devoid of humor. You built an empire. Julian, you grace magazine covers. What was so complicated about picking up a phone, sending a letter, anything other than treating me like collateral damage in your relentless climb? She stood up, pacing now, the pent-up energy of years finally breaking free. Do you have any idea what it was like, trying to understand? Blaming myself, picking up the pieces alone. I know it wasn't easy, he offered lamely. Easy. She spun to face him, tears now tracking paths down her cheeks. Unchecked. Easy. I lost my job shortly after you left. The company downsized. I had nothing. No savings to speak of because we were saving together. Remember, for our future, I ended up back home, tail between my legs. Then I met someone else. Thought maybe I could start again. Turns out he was better at making debts than keeping promises. She gestured vaguely, indicating the children in the next room. He left too. Left me with 2 beautiful kids and a mountain of bills I've been drowning under ever since. So no, Julian, it wasn't easy. He stood there, taking the full force of her pain, her anger. He deserved it, all of it. The walls he had built so carefully were crumbling, exposing the raw, terrified core he had hidden for so long. I didn't know, he whispered the admission, costing him dearly. Of course you didn't know, she cried. Because you never looked back. You just cut the cord and walked away. She finally stopped pacing, standing directly in front of him, searching his face. Why, Julian? I deserve to know. After all this time, tell me the truth. Why did you leave? This was it. The moment of reckoning. He could retreat, offer platitudes, try to buy his way out again. Or he could tell her the truth. The ugly, fearful truth he had never spoken aloud to anyone. He sank onto the opposing sofa, the strength suddenly leaving his legs. He buried his face in his hands for a moment, the picture of composure shattering completely. When he looked up, his eyes were stark, with a pain that mirrored her own. Because I was a coward, he said, the words torn from him. Because I was terrified. Eleanor stared, confusion replacing the anger in her eyes. Terrified. Of what you were never afraid of. Anything I was wrong, he choked out, just before I left. I lost almost everything. Not you. Not then. My first major solo venture, I trusted the wrong partner, poured everything I had into it, emotionally, financially. He wiped me out, betrayed me completely. It wasn't just the money. It was the trust, the vulnerability. He looked at her. His gaze haunted. It broke something inside me. Eleanor, I felt exposed, raw, powerless. And I looked at you, at us, at how much I cared. He struggled with the word, and all I could see was another potential vulnerability. Another way I could be destroyed. So you destroyed us first, she whispered, the dawning horror clear in her voice. He nodded, unable to meet her eyes. I convinced myself it was logical, that I couldn't build what I needed to build, couldn't become who I needed to become, if I was compromised by emotion. By connection, I told myself I was protecting you in a twisted way, that my world was too dangerous, too unstable, but the truth. He finally looked up, his expression raw with self-loathing. The truth is, I was terrified of being hurt like that again. Terrified of trusting anyone, even you. Especially you, because you mattered the most. So I ran. I cut the ties. I built walls of ice and money and pretended it was strength. Pretended you didn't matter. It was the most cowardly thing I've ever done. The confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Eleanor sank back onto the sofa, processing the revelation. The man she thought had callously abandoned her for ambition had been driven by fear, by a wound so deep he had preemptively severed the most important connection in his life. It wasn't the explanation she had imagined, not the one she had nursed in her anger for 12 years. It was messier, more tragic, and somehow almost more painful. Tears streamed down her face now. Silent tears of grief for the past, for the misunderstanding, for the years lost. Julian watched her, his own eyes suspiciously bright, the tightly controlled dam within him finally breached. He had laid bare the ugliest part of himself, the secret shame that had fueled his cold empire. The truth was out, raw, painful, and irrevocable. It hung between them, shattering the old narratives, leaving nothing but the wreckage of the past and the terrifying uncertainty of what, if anything, could be built in its place. The raw honesty of Julian's confession hung heavy in the sterile air of the hotel suite, a painful, fragile bridge between two fractured pasts. There were no easy apologies, no immediate absolution. The wounds were too deep, the lost years too vast. What followed wasn't a sudden reconciliation, but a quiet, exhausted truce. Eleanor, still reeling, but seeing the genuine broken man behind the billionaire facade for the first time in years, needed space. Julian stripped bare of his defenses, finally understood the need to give it. He didn't vanish this time. That was the first crucial difference. He ensured Eleanor and the children were secure in comfortable temporary housing, not opulent, but safe and warm. He made it clear through concise, respectful communication, often relayed awkwardly via Michael initially, until Eleanor signaled she could speak to him directly, that his legal team had permanently neutralized Silas Croft and settled the predatory debts. He offered resources, but crucially he waited for her to indicate what help she actually wanted, a restraint utterly foreign to his usual methods. The rebuilding wasn't a swift construction project. It was painstaking archaeology, carefully uncovering foundations, mending fractures piece by piece. Julian learned slowly, awkwardly. He learned that atonement wasn't a transaction, but a sustained effort. He started by showing up. He arranged for proper winter coats, for Lily and Thomas, delivered anonymously at first, until Eleanor, with a weary sigh that held a hint of thawing ice, told him to just bring them yourself. Julian, stop acting like a covert operative. He did, and faced the wide, curious eyes of the children directly. His initial attempts at interaction were exercises in profound awkwardness. He tried to discuss market trends with 6-year-old Lily and explained leverage ratios to 4-year-old Thomas when asked about building blocks. Subtle humor, Eleanor had to gently intervene, explaining that synergy wasn't typically a factor in building a Lego castle. He discovered he was abysmal at hide-and-seek, too logical, and even worse, at reading fairy tales aloud. His deep baritone made Cinderella sound like a hostile takeover bid. Yet he persisted, his stiffness gradually giving way to a tentative, genuine warmth, fueled by the children's uncomplicated acceptance. He also learned to listen. He listened as Eleanor slowly, cautiously began to talk, not just about her struggles, but about her dreams, the ones she'd buried beneath layers of survival. She'd always had a talent for design, a keen eye for restoring old furniture, a skill abandoned long ago. Julian the Old. Julian would have offered to buy her a furniture store. The new Julian listened, asked questions, and then quietly researched local artisan programs and small business grants, presenting her with information, not directives. He offered to fund a course, support a startup if and when she felt ready. He was offering tools, not solutions handed down from on high. Eleanor, meanwhile, navigated her own complex path. She battled residual anger and years of ingrained mistrust, seeing Julian's consistent effort, his vulnerability, his awkward attempts with her children chipped away at her defenses. She saw the genuine regret in his eyes, the concerted effort to be different. She began accepting his help, not as charity, but as a form of restitution, a partnership forged in the ruins of their past. Crucially, she focused on her own future. She found part-time work that offered more dignity. She enrolled in an online design course. Julian had found her old passion slowly rekindling. She was reclaiming her life piece by piece on her own terms. Forgiveness wasn't a single event. It arrived quietly in increments. It was in the easy silence that could now fall between them without feeling heavy with unspoken words. It was in Eleanor asking Julian for his opinion on a design sketch. It was in Julian finding himself smiling genuinely as Thomas proudly showed him a drawing that looked suspiciously like a stock ticker symbol wearing a hat, subtle humor, a Tickersaurus Rex. Julian had asked, earning a giggle from Thomas and a shared knowing glance with Eleanor. It was in the slow, dawning realization that the bitterness that had fueled Eleanor for so long was gradually being replaced by a cautious hope. Julian, too, was changing. The walls around his heart hadn't vanished, but they were lower, allowing light and connection in. He found himself delegating more at work, realizing his empire wouldn't crumble if he wasn't ruthlessly micromanaging every detail. He even started using his vast resources differently, anonymously funding a wing at a children's hospital, specializing in respiratory illnesses, a quiet nod to the debt that had crippled Eleanor. His interactions with his staff became less transactional, more human. Michael almost fainted when Julian actually asked about his weekend. Months bled into a year, Eleanor with support, but largely through her own grit, had moved them into a small, bright apartment she could afford. She was working on commission, restoring antique furniture. Her talent finding an appreciative audience. Lily and Thomas were thriving, enrolled in a good school, losing the haunted look in their eyes, secure in their mother's love, and unexpectedly in the steady, reliable presence of the once cold millionaire. So what was this? The shocking choice had led to this It wasn't a fairy tale romance, rekindled overnight. It was something quieter, more profound. This was Julian Thorne sitting not in a boardroom, but on a slightly too small chair in Eleanor's cheerful, cluttered living room, patiently helping Lily with her math homework, explaining fractions with surprising clarity. This was Eleanor confidently presenting her restoration work at a local craft fair, her face glowing with pride and purpose, spotting Julian giving her a discreet thumbs up from the back of the crowd. This was the easy companionship that now existed between them, built on honesty, mutual respect, and shared laughter over Julian's latest failed attempt at assembling a child's toy. Scars remained visible reminders of the past, but they were no longer gaping wounds. This was the earned peace settling over Julian, a quiet contentment he'd never found in billion-dollar deals. He had faced his past, his fear, his cowardice, and chosen a different path. He hadn't just rescued Eleanor. In reaching out, in allowing himself to be vulnerable, in learning to connect, he had begun the long, slow process of rescuing himself. The gilded cage stood empty now, its door unlocked. Julian Thorne finally understood that true wealth wasn't measured in stock portfolios or skyscrapers, but in the messy, unpredictable, infinitely precious currency of human connection, and that understanding, earned through pain and sustained by effort, was the most valuable asset he had ever acquired. The future was unwritten, but for the first time in a long time, it felt genuinely bright with possibility. What does it truly take to tear down the walls we build around our hearts? Julian and Eleanor's journey shows us redemption isn't a single grand gesture, but the quiet, persistent work of showing up day after day. It reminds us that even deep fractures can begin to mend when we dare to face our past and embrace vulnerability. Perhaps their story echoes moments in our own lives, chances for connection almost missed, or the courage needed for a second chance. This story of healing and finding purpose truly resonated with us, and we hope it touched you too. We'd love to hear your reflections. Do you believe true redemption, like Julian sought, is always possible, even after years of mistakes? Share your deepest thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback also helps us grow and bring you more meaningful narratives. Please let us know if you have any suggestions about today's story or ideas for future ones. If this journey moved you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might find hope in their path. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you won't miss our next exploration into the heart of human connection. You can find more emotional stories right here on the screen. Until next time, take care and keep seeking the connections that matter.